All right, welcome everybody to your Healthy Self webinar and podcast. This is your co-host, Cade Archibald, and really excited to be with you guys today. And along with me, we got the amazing original founder and creator of East West Health, Go Wellness, and multi-book author, Reagan Archibald. Reagan, how you doing?
Really good.
Awesome. Well, we got some really cool stuff we're going to be covering today. We got Steve Cox, PA with East West Health. It's going to be joining us talking about joint pain and a couple things there. Am I right?
Steve's coming in. We're going to be talking about regenerative medicine and anti-aging.
All right. Well, we are really excited about that. I'm just bringing him on.
Awesome.
Give me just a second. So I'm gonna turn it over to you, and let's. If you guys have any questions, I'm gonna be in the background to answer questions. Type them into the chat box, and let's get this thing kicked off.
All right. Well, good to have you on, Steve. Welcome.
Yep, I'm here. The video should be working here in a sec.
Okay, no worries. So just to give Steve a proper introduction, Steve Cox graduated from medical school at West Virginia University. He's a physician assistant, been in the orthopedic surgical world. He practiced that for at least 10 years in Utah and Washington, and then came on board to East West about 2 years ago and has just been a phenomenal provider, somebody who's got incredible skill at treating all kinds of conditions. And the best thing about working with Steve is I hear it from patients all the time where they just can't say enough good things about the efficiency of the care that he provides, and also his great bedside manner, and also his depth of knowledge. So today, Steve and I are going to be talking about how to live healthy and die youthful in an old age. We'll be talking about some regenerative medicine. And so type in any questions you have for him. But Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, so Steve, as we look at some things I want to cover today, and you and I had talked about kind of having a good format, let's kind of tell the listeners what they can expect. So number one, we're going to talk about how regenerative medicine might be the solution to many conditions of aging. And number two, why key peptides that influence stem cells and why NAD can be a genetic cleanse. And I know you're a big fan of NAD. We're also going to be talking about the best ways to influence cellular health and vitality. And then we'll talk about some of the latest stem cell breakthroughs and how to safely use them. The other thing we'll talk about is how to transform healing with BPC 157, stem cells, and exosomes. Top secrets are the 3-4-5 method. And then we're going to talk about the regenerative medicine breakthrough. So does that sound good to everybody?
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Okay, beautiful. So let's jump in. So 95% of the world's population has health. A third of those have more than 5 chronic conditions. So Steve, as you look at that, would you say that aging is a health problem in our patients?
Oh, I mean, definitely. As you know, we always tell patients in our seminars and in our consultations, aging is one of the top, reasons why we die.
Right.
It's one of the main killers.
Right. Aubrey de Grey is one of my favorite kind of researchers and speakers on aging. And he says, just like smoking, aging is really dangerous. It kills over 100,000 people every day. And so,
Yep.
And so this is a condition that we've tried to solve. I mean, obviously, no one has all the answers to aging, but I think there's some ways we can mitigate it, because what are some of the symptoms that show up in the body, like the first symptoms of aging that you've seen, Steve?
Well, I mean, as we age, and we, well, first you have to understand how the stem cells work in the body.
Yeah.
And as we get older and we hit our kind of mid 30s, early 40s, even a little bit younger for some, we start to produce less stem cells than the cells that we lose. And so at that point, then we're just kind of slowly dying, over time. And our cells are breaking down, and we don't have the stem cell population to make up for that, So we start to see cartilage breakdown. We start to see less healing potential. We start to see discs, that are desiccated and bulging in the back, and things like that. It starts out as achiness and tendonitis in the younger people, and just not, getting injured and not being able to heal like we used to. As we get older and older, then it starts to become osteopenia and osteoporosis, with increased cartilage breakdown, osteoarthritis. It could even be decreased immune system with more autoimmunity present. Could be a sign of aging and loss of stem cell population. And then, of course, we're more fallible to sickness and disease and things like that. So that's kind of what we see.
And you've done a lot of work with patients with stem cell therapy, and you've seen some pretty amazing turnarounds. So one of the things you're realizing is that this aging. Hey, there you are. Your camera. We got you. Welcome. There's your pretty face, Mr. Steve. So if you look at the big purpose behind putting these perinatal allografts, these tissue allografts in people's joints, I mean, from what it sounds like, is you're trying to reverse some of the aging that's already occurred there.
Correct. Yeah. And so we're trying to rejuvenate. Sure, no, I'm not muted. We're trying to rejuvenate the tissues, trying to rejuvenate those stem cell populations.
Right.
And then we have stem cell recruitment as well. So we're getting recruitment of your own stem cells to just, basically help the body heal, regenerate, and actually reverse the clock a little bit. And the peptides do a really good job of that as well, especially NAD and VPC-157.
Yes, those, and we're going to talk about those a little later. Those are pretty powerful. So right now, if you look at the CDC's website, I was just on there, what they say is 50 million adults have chronic pain daily or almost daily. And would you say pain contributes to aging?
Oh, I mean, definitely. What they've shown, and there's studies that have shown this actually, people who have chronic pain, they've done MRI scans and PET scans and CT scans of their brain versus people who do not have chronic pain. There's a definite difference, and they've shown actual aging differences, and the brains appear to be chronologically and biologically older in the patients that have chronic pain versus the patients that don't. And so it definitely can exacerbate aging. It can exacerbate just overall body health and wellness, and then lead to further sicknesses, autoimmunities, with a compromised immune system.
Yeah, and I think that study you're alluding to is the functional MRI of the brain, where it shows it ages 5 to 10 years with chronic low back pain is one of the studies I've seen, and then chronic pain in general. That's crazy,
Yep.
isn't it? So if you want to get older, have a lot of chronic pain. If you really want to, so it's called premature mortality is when you walk around with chronic diseases or chronic pain. It actually, even though you live a long time, you're basically living with disease, which means it's taking away from your life. And I believe that your life expectancy and your quality of life is directly correlated to your quality of health. So some critical things to consider. One of the mindsets in medicine that's been really frustrating is if you look at Medicare, I remember looking at some of the guidelines in Medicare, and one of the guidelines, it says care that seeks to prevent disease, promote health, and prolong and enhance the quality of life is not considered medically necessary. Seems a little cold by the government to, they're like, well, congratulations, you've worked your whole life and now you're 65 and you qualify for Medicare. But if you want to do anything that prevents disease or promotes health, it's not on us. So what does Medicare cover? I mean, what's their overall purpose?
Yeah, I mean, and that just furthers the argument that we live more in a reactive healthcare system, because Medicare, CMS kind of really does dictate what we can do and what the system is and what is allowed to be done in the healthcare system. And so it's more of a reactive. It's once you show these signs, we'll then proceed with this treatment or this surgery or this medication. Anything that's considered preventative or enhancing and is not based on a specific diagnosis or a drug, then they won't cover it.
Yeah, which is interesting because I mean you worked in the orthopedic surgical world and saved a lot of lives doing it, and I mean so necessary many of these surgeries, but you started to see that, man, maybe there's some proactive things we could do to prevent the surgeries. And so what's your take on that from what you've seen working in the field versus working in regenerative medicine now?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even to the point where I actually got pushback from a lot of the surgeons that I was working with, because it doesn't go according to the normal protocol that we're taught in medical school. We're taught in medical school to do our exam, do our history and physical, establish a diagnosis, and from there it's recommended a drug or the appropriate care, which is usually a drug or a surgery. Excuse me. And that's usually how we're taught, and that's pretty straightforward. We're not really taught to think outside the box, and we're kind of taught that alternative medicine, Chinese medicine, things outside the box are kind of snake oil or there's not data enough to support
not
it.
Scientific, not evidence-based. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. And so when I was actually with a more progressive surgeon, my previous surgeon that I was working with, and we started using stem cells actually for our post-surgery athletes who were trying to get them back to sports as soon as possible, or either our professionals or our collegiate athletes. And what we noticed was that the stem cells really halved the recovery time when we did it for ACL reconstructions and Achilles tendon repairs and elbow surgeries and ankle surgeries and things like that along those lines. And so we started actually using it for some of our osteoarthritis patients, some of our partial ACL tears, partial Achilles tendon tears. And it worked great. It worked really well. In fact, they didn't need the surgery anymore. And that's not so good for a surgeon who needs to do the surgery to make the money, right?
Right, sure.
But really, really good for the patient. And so, I started going along those lines and actually recommending more alternative treatment for my patients, and kind of got a little bit more pushback from the surgeons at that point. And that's when I said, I don't know if I want to do surgery anymore. If all we're going to do is look at x-rays and prescribe a surgery, when maybe there's another option and we can keep people out of these really invasive surgeries, keep these complications effectively zero. I mean, if you don't do the surgery, there's no complications.
Right.
And so with a non-invasive, alternative medicine like stem cells or PRP or ozone, there's no risk and there's no complications. And so that's what I wanted to do. So that's what I did.
Yeah, no, and it's been phenomenal. I mean, you've treated me many times, putting the pieces back together after my snowboarding or skateboarding accidents, and it's been awesome. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And then just with thousands, hundreds at least of our patients, you're probably close to 1,000 now over the last couple of years. And you add in the Go Wellness patients. So Steve travels. He goes to Hawaii, does trainings, been to Indiana. I mean, he does trainings for doctors all over the country, which is pretty phenomenal. I mean, Steve is the expert in the industry. And so Steve, you mentioned we practice reactive medicine, and in most cases we do, but now Medicare, there's some regenerative medicine, like our stem cell recruitment product. And I know there's a lot of our listeners who are like really interested in getting their joints young again. And so tell me a little bit about the kind of the Russell Health and how that differs from like our Utah Cord Bank cells that we've been using.
Yeah, so this is a really cool development. It's actually been around for a couple of years now. It's an amniotic tissue graft, essentially, and we've been using it in surgery for a while, even back when I was doing surgery, and it's been a couple of years now since I've been in surgery. So it's been around for a little while, and it essentially was a tissue graft. There's a powder form as well, but It was a very small, very thin tissue, amniotic tissue graft that we would put into the surgical wounds or on a surgical site or an open wound to recruit stem cells and recruit healing properties to that area. And we saw really good healing, advanced, very prolific healing of that area. And so we would use it in surgery, especially for really hard rotator cuff repairs, any kind of nerve damage or nerve repairs that we would do. We would wrap it kind of in that amniotic tissue graft. And at that time, at least Medicare for sure, and I think other insurance companies were covering it. And now we've kind of moved into, okay, now we're able to take this tissue graft and inject it actually into joints, into areas of the body.
Yeah.
Or increase stem cell recruitment. And so that's what we're talking about here with Russell Health and with the the flower amnio flow. And Medicare, I mean, we have to meet certain criteria. We do have to designate a diagnosis code that is accepted. And we have to do a thorough, history and physical, and show that there has been damage and that, we've tried different conservative care treatment options like physical therapy, anti-inflammatories, injections. They have imaging that shows that there is, cartilage loss, there's damage, and encephalopathy, that's a hard one. Encephalopathies, which is a big term for saying there's damage at the bone where the tissue attaches so that new bone growth has formed, but it's not healing. That's kind of what happens like with tennis elbow. Yeah. And so this is a very, very good option that we have now to offer people who are covered by Medicare or TRICARE or even other insurance companies that cover it.
Yeah, and the caveat is the frustrating thing is all the stem cells are sterilized terminally, so that means they're all dead. But it still is what we look at as a booster, and I think Medicare is moving in the right direction, which is really exciting.
Right, I agree. At least they're willing to accept that, hey, there's this regenerative medicine option. So as long as they're looking in that direction, I think that's a great step towards the future of going towards an alternative regenerative medicine option. And like you said, Reagan, all the live cells there's no live cells in the product, but a lot of good recruitment cells. There's still a lot of really good growth factors, proteins, and healing cells, and some scaffolding there as well.
And so if someone has already had stem cell injections in their knee, let's say like last month, I got my knees injected and I've got Medicare, would this be something that, like the Russell Health product, the stem cell recruitment process, would that be helpful?
Yeah, I think it would be helpful. There's still more data that needs to be done to see how much recruitment we get, how much do you need. I think at this point, even if we've done stem cells previously, this could be a very good option, kind of like the PRP, but maybe even a better option than the PRP, or along the same lines as promoting more kind of food for the stem cells, more life for the stem cells, even if you had it before. It's definitely going to recruit those cells and your own stem cells. So we kind of get triple action there.
Makes sense. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I guess they're younger growth factors. If you look at, some of the literature on their capabilities, they seem to be a little more robust than someone's own platelets. I mean, that's why athletes respond way better to PRP than, older people do, just because they have a lot more activity in those growth factors. So yeah, it seems like that would be, could be some good fertilizer for the stem cells. So if we look at one of the things that I find in working with several 90-year-olds, or my wife's grandmother turned 102 a couple of days ago. On Tuesday was her birthday. 102, that's crazy.
Congratulations.
That's awesome. And she's just feisty and keeps going. But one of the populations that lives the longest is the Japanese population. And interesting study that I've just been reading on peptides is there's an enzyme called the MOTC, and they find that when this enzyme is more active, it opens up the longevity genes in the body. So it basically blocks some of the mTOR pathways and allows people to live much longer. And the Japanese population seems to have more activity in this MOTS enzyme. And so Japan is having a huge population crisis. I mean, their population has declined over 3 million people in the last 10 years. And so that's scary, because they're at their peak population, which was 130 million. Now they're down to closer to like 127, 126 million. So that's an issue. And so Japan has these, they're really rolling out stem cell therapy, looking at anti-aging techniques. But you lived in Japan for a couple of years, Steve. And
I did live in Japan for a couple of years.
And so can you say, Ohio?
Yeah. Ohio gozaimasu.
Yeah, so that's good morning. But what did you notice was different about the lifestyle in Japan versus the American lifestyle?
Well, I mean, the biggest difference by far is the diet. They just don't eat. They don't eat what we eat. They don't eat near as much as we eat. Their diet is based mainly off of rice and fish and vegetables and a whole lot seaweed and sushi and things like that. A lot healthier diet. They do have fast food over there, but it's few and in between, and their portion sizes are a lot smaller as well. Again, I don't claim to be an expert on Japanese culture, and it's been a while since I've been there, but just some things that I noticed when I was there. Of course, they would go as far as to ban us, the Americans, from some of their restaurants because they said we ate too much.
Are you kidding me?
No, it's true. They have a Sizzler in Tokyo, and the Mormon missionaries were banned from Sizzler, at least while I was there, because we just eat too much.
That is hilarious. Well, this is what my Japanese teacher said, because I studied Japanese acupuncture, and my teacher would always say, like, overeating is the number one sin that you can commit to your body, is overeating. So yeah, it's a big. They'd say eat till you're 80% full, and then be done with it. So I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. And do you have a favorite sushi restaurant here in Utah?
I really like the J&C House in Riverton.
Okay.
I think they do a very good job.
Nice. Have you been to Takashi downtown?
I have not.
Tsunami on 9th and 9th?
Tsunami is very good as well. I've been there quite a few times.
Okay. Yeah, you got to try Takashi. It's one of my favorites, but take your wife on a little date there. So so I think the Japanese culture is just beautiful. And there's a lot of things that I just love about it. And so, but something we can learn about longevity is, just like Steve said, is, watch the amount of food you're eating. And that's where we like to say, it's not even, what you eat, it's when you eat and how much you eat can really cause an impact on your body. If you just notice that, if you eat too much, you're going to get a stuffy nose. That's like one of the first indications of too much food. If you eat just enough, your nose, your body, when it starts secreting different enzymes that allows you to break down food, you'll notice you'll get some nasal secretions and mucus secretions, because it does stimulate some histamines in your body. And that's normal. So don't be weirded out about that. But when your nose goes completely stuffy, either you've eaten a food that your body's reacting to, which is causing inflammation, or you've overeaten, which also causes inflammation. Because inflammation, Steve, like, what are some of the inflammatory markers that you look at in your functional blood chemistry that would indicate someone's aging faster than you'd want them to?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few inflammation markers. The main ones we look at are like C-reactive protein, homocysteine, fibrinogen. You can look at a SED rate as well. But even looking at just the blood count itself, white blood cells, red blood cells, hemoglobin, hematocrit, and then some of the kidney and liver function tests, all of those can be indicative of inflammation. Even some of the electrolytes as well are usually indicative of inflammation of the GI tract. So you can find signs and markers of inflammation throughout the entire functional blood chemistry.
Yeah, pretty fascinating, isn't it? And so
yes,
a lot of times we can fixate on like C-reactive protein or homocysteine, but then if you actually start looking for, like proof or evidence of maybe there's some downstream inflammation that hasn't quite shown as a systemic inflammatory response, that's really when you can cut it down and you can avoid a lot of those diseases. Are there any diseases that chronic diseases anyway that don't stem from inflammation in some of those tissues?
I mean, that's a tough question to answer, because when you look at even autoimmunity, usually there's some kind of root in inflammation. I mean, there are genetic chronic diseases, there are autoimmune chronic diseases, and they cause inflammation. But usually how we treat autoimmunity is to get the inflammation down. And when we do that, the autoimmunity comes down as well. So does the pain. Now, we can never really, it's hard to get rid of the autoimmunity totally. You know, but we focus on getting the body as healthy as possible, decreasing the inflammation, balancing our nutrients and our vitamins, eating a healthy diet, and exercising on a daily basis, as well as staying hydrated. That's really what we focus on.
Right. Well, it's kind of interesting with autoimmunity is, you know, it's like, well, you can recalibrate your immune system so your body's not fighting itself, but you can also get shifted back into that mode. And so it's the same with me with my Hashimoto's is I haven't had a thyroid flare in over 6 years, but I guarantee you that I know how I could bring that thing, I could resurrect that disease, that autoimmunity. And so, so yeah, and that's where we tell people health is a journey and healing never ends. It's like a day by day process. So very, very interesting. So right now, if you look at just the age of in the United States, people who are 65 and older, it's increasing every single year. So the baby boomers, which we appreciate all of you. You guys had a lot of babies. You brought great infrastructure into the United States. And this was a huge explosion, not only for us economically, but innovatively. I mean, the baby boomers, arguably, like they planted the foundation for the next couple hundred years in the United States. But now that you guys are getting older, sorry, you guys are all turning over 65, and by 2030, 21% of the population is going to be over 65. And so, Steve, what diseases do you think that people need to be most concerned about as they get older?
So as we get older, again, the body is breaking down. And so osteoarthritis, everybody gets it to some degree. In our older population, of course, it's exaggerated, and it's further just much worse. And so osteopenia, osteoporosis, and then we're at risk for more community diseases like pneumonia, flu, cold, just regular cold viruses, you know, and I hate to mention it, but even the coronavirus right now, again, it's the older population that are at risk for this. The younger population that are overall fairly healthy are not nearly at risk. Almost everybody will recover from it, but it's the older population that are immune deficient, that are more susceptible to these diseases that are at risk. And that's what we see, is that these community diseases like pneumonia and flu and cold and viruses and things like that, we're more at risk for those. We're more at risk for falling and fractures. And things like that. And studies have shown for decades that, you know, you fall, you break your hip, your overall life expectancy just went down by half.
Yeah.
You know, whatever you had left just decreased by half.
Just by breaking a hip.
Just by breaking a hip, yeah.
I mean, that's a big deal, but that's so common. And so, you know, and I've looked at, you know, if you look at studies of frailty, like balance and muscle strength are two things that are so critical. And so what are some ways that, you know, let's say someone is listening and they're in their 70s, maybe 80s, and they're like, well, I want to make sure I protect my bone structure and keep better balance. What are some things that, that you would recommend?
So definitely daily exercise, but be safe. Do I think that running is the best exercise? Not necessarily, especially as we get older. We're losing that cartilage in our knees and our hips and our ankles. So the constant pounding on the joints is not necessarily the best exercise for you. Maybe walking or swimming in the pool would be better. An elliptical machines, cycling on the spin bike would be better options for you, because you want to keep your muscles nice and flexible and strong. That way you can continue to have that strength and balance when you're walking. Another thing is to do some yoga, do some Pilates, do some strength training as well. Sometimes I even send people to physical therapy just for balance training and to tone their muscles, that kind of thing. There are supplements you can take like vitamin D and calcium.
Yeah.
Although the studies are showing that we need to take that sooner rather than later. Once we hit osteoporosis, the damage has kind of already been done. At that point, we really should have been supplementing a lot sooner than that. But yeah, and then staying hydrated, being as healthy as possible, nice healthy diet, lots of veggies, and get rid of that inflammatory stuff. Get rid of sugar. If gluten's a bother for you, or if you know you have an allergy to it, obviously we don't want you to take it or ingest it. Take your multivitamins, your omega-3s and things like that.
Good. Yeah. And I think these are great things. And staying active, I made a goal for myself about 5 years ago. I said, I'm going to work out every day. And part of my workout, I've been skateboarding. You skateboard as well. I mean, that's huge for balance, great for the brain. The osteoporosis, I mean, I look at that and I say, yeah, well, we can supplement with calcium or magnesium, whatever, but man, just doing some load bearing exercises is going to be a lot better. You get out in the sun in the morning, you get flush with vitamin D. There's some massive things that you want to do. And I guess that's why we do functional blood chemistry, is so that we can see where your imbalances are, and get the right substances in your body that way. But Dan Sullivan, who you've treated, and Steve's seen his improvements, but he practices, he does balancing at least once a week. He works out every day and he burns 1,000 calories. He's on like day 730 or something like that of burning 1,000 calories every day before breakfast. I mean, he works out like a beast, and he's 75, just going stronger and stronger.
Right.
We tested his telomeres, and we got his telomeres down from he's 75. We took him down with stem cell IVs and treating his brain, and we got him down to a 64-year-old in just the amount of 6 months. So yeah, some pretty interesting things, but you've got to focus on balance, get the right nutrition in. So let's talk about this. Oh, go ahead, Steve.
I was just saying, stay active. Stay active.
Yes. Yes. And, the study on frailty that I love the most is the one where, it was published in the Journal of Gerontology. They did stem cell IVs, and they looked at all the blood markers, and all the blood markers show that just with stem cells, they were safe, well tolerated, but they actually kept those markers of aging down almost a year in the candidates, and they had better balance, better strength. I mean, we've even seen that with osteoporosis. We've had patients who their osteoporosis has completely gone away with stem cells, and that's been pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And Epitalon. So let's talk about telomeres. I mean, this is kind of interesting. What do you know about telomeres, Steve, and how would you describe that to our audience?
So telomeres is not something I've studied extensively. Really, I only heard about it once I came over to the regenerative medicine side. We didn't, and I'm sure there's a Western medicine, a whole subject and research devoted to it. It just wasn't in my wheelhouse. I was more orthopedics. And so once I came over to the regenerative medicine side, heard about telomeres, and they're kind of the age of our cells, associated with our DNA and our genetic makeup. But we can actually kind of test and see how old our cells are, and how versus our chronological and our biological age. That's kind of my understanding of it.
That's it. Yes. And if you look at the shoelace, how the shoelace keeps all the strings and the fibers, intact. If you lose that little seal at the end of the shoelace, then the shoelace starts to unravel. And that's the same thing with our DNA. The shorter that seal is at the bottom, then our cells actually age, because the DNA starts to unravel. And when DNA unravels, then the cell can't be as intentional. It loses its structure, and then it's not sending out the right signals. And then the cell starts releasing these inflammatory cytokines. And so it kind of goes into crisis mode. So telomeres, that's where we said, well, if we can measure telomeres, we can actually see the age of the cell. And so we've looked at this because one of the studies that is fascinating to me is a study where they proved that if you took 7 years off somebody's life, so you made them 7 years younger, you reduce 50% of the diseases. And so any baby boomers out there, if you're in your 60s, 50s, 40s, 30s, I mean, any age, you need to be worried about, keeping your cells healthy. And so if you could reduce 50% of your diseases, that's great. And so I looked at peptides. As you know, I've been diving deep into peptides the last couple of years. And there's a peptide called Epitalon that was made by a Russian scientist, Vladimir, I can't remember how to pronounce his last name. And he made these peptides in the 80s. And in the study that he took this control group who didn't get the Epitalon. He took the other group who he gave them 3 cycles of Epitalon. And the group that got 3 cycles of Epitalon lived 7 years longer than the group that didn't get it. And they didn't do anything else differently. And that's pretty fascinating. So Epitalon's interesting because it works on the pineal gland and it helps produce the enzymes called telomerase that actually helps the telomeres grow in the cells. And if we can help the telomeres grow, then it basically keeps the structure of the DNA sound so that the transcription, translation, replication all occurs so your body can grow new cells. And so what else happens in the pineal gland? Why would you say that telomerase, the enzyme, comes from the pineal gland? What else comes from the pineal gland, Steve?
You're putting me on the spot here.
Oh, sorry. I thought it was pineal gland is melatonin. So melatonin.
Yes, I know melatonin. It's been a while since I've been in medical school.
I thought I was giving you a lob. No, it's my bad. It was okay. So the scientist who discovered this was Vladimir Konvinson. And so he spent 35 years. I mean, he's done animal and human trials. But if you think about what melatonin does, I mean, what do you find when patients have this imbalance between melatonin and cortisol, Steve?
So melatonin is one of the main kind of enzymes in our body that governs our skin tone, but also our sleep-wake cycle as well.
Right.
It's one of the reasons why we can take melatonin at night, and for some people it helps them sleep. Kind of thing, and so melatonin is affected by the sun's rays as well and darkens our skin. But with cortisol, we kind of have this HPA axis as well, but with cortisol, it governs our sleep-wake cycle. And then cortisol is made in our adrenal glands and is kind of our energy fight or flight hormone as well. And so it has a relationship with melatonin too. And so if those are off balance, then we don't sleep right, our energy is off, our sleep-wake cycle is off. And so then we're sleeping when we shouldn't be and we're awake when we shouldn't be. And then we can see chronic fatigue from this. We can actually start to see imbalances in our hormones as well. And this leads to further overall just unhealthiness and inflammation. And then overall feeling just horrible.
Right.
Really.
Yeah. And so you can imagine that if you could get the melatonin cycles balanced, your circadian rhythms, they start to get regulated. I mean, you just think we just went and we sprung forward in time. So this week, have you noticed everyone's a little bit tired in the office, and our patients come in, they're like, I'm a little more tired because just that hour, it takes a full week to balance the circadian rhythms just by going outside of a time zone for 1 hour. And so we're all trying to get our cells regulated because our cells, about 22% of cells operate on this biological clock from the DNA perspective. Cells turn on, cells turn off. But melatonin and cortisol are kind of the hormones that tell the cells when to turn on and when to turn off. And so it has such a critical role. And so you can just imagine, it makes sense biologically that we have the same telomerase, that enzyme that causes the lengthening of our DNA, the strength of our DNA. It also ties into the melatonin, which is phenomenal. And so, so Epitalon is one of those anti-aging peptides that I think is phenomenal for so many of you. The other thing that I look at is, you brought up the fact that it's the elderly who are getting hit by, that they get hit the hardest by the flu virus. I mean, you go to the hospital and that's a very scary place to be. But, let's talk a little bit about the thymosins. And, and how people, for any of you who are out there buying toilet paper up, by the way, it's all gone. You can't get toilet
Yeah.
paper on Amazon, Costco. We're in this like crazy crisis, and people are, they're going crazy. I mean, part of what you can do is make your immune system more selective. And Sarah and I did a great overall perspective on the antiviral effects of thymosin alpha-1. Steve and I'll touch on it briefly today, but some of the other things that you guys can do is, instead of buying out the toilet paper, go buy out the rosemary. Sage has antiviral properties. Buy out the mints, the peppermint, the spearmint, all those things. I chew on them every morning. Basil, all those aromatic herbs have natural antiviral capabilities. The other study that was just released, I don't think I posted it on WhatsApp yet, but the second case of HIV has been cured with stem cells, which is interesting because stem cells also have antiviral properties in their secretomes. But what have you seen in using thymosin alpha-1 clinically, Steve?
So thymosin alpha-1 is great. It's really, we've used it for autoimmunity, Lyme's disease, chronic disease processes, cancer, and viral processes. It just really helps with cell turnover. Just some more information on it here. Oh, yep, there we go.
There you go, Steve.
So yeah, I mean, it's a really good modulator of the immune system and immune function, and has a lot of immunoregulatory properties there. And so again, with these things that affect the immune system and lower the immune system, like certain diseases, autoimmunity, cancer, viruses, things like that, it really helps to kind of curb those back down to where they're not being as much as a problem, they're not causing as much inflammation, and just overall very good for chronic fatigue, things like that.
Right. Yeah, and I've got my wife, she's doing this every day because she's dealt with some autoimmunity. I got my kids, they're doing injections of thymosin alpha-1. It's cool. One of my son's school teachers came in yesterday and he's like, all right, I'm here for the coronavirus cure. And so we gave him the thymosin alpha-1 and then cordyceps 3. So there's just phenomenal things that we can do. And thymosin alpha-1 is just, not only is it incredibly safe, it's shown to be safer than the placebo in some of the studies that they've done, but it's also an FDA approved medication that had orphan status in 2013, and for conditions that are like lupus, psoriatic arthritis, Hashimoto's, RA. I mean, there's just some phenomenal things that can happen with the thymosin alpha-1, and it's very safe. So if somebody's traveling, thymosin alpha-1, is there any other immune boosting, herbs or supplements that you like to put your patients on?
Let's see. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of products out there. There's a lot of good traditional Chinese herbs that are good. Like Evergreen has a great product, Immune Plus.
Yeah.
Which a lot of the really good immune boosting herbs in it. Let's see.
I see you prescribe a lot of the adaptogen.
Yes, yeah.
Apex.
Yeah, adaptocrine is a good one. Apex has a lot of good products. Natural Stacks has a lot of good products. Metagenics. I mean, I could keep going. And every company has kind of their own immune modulating prescriptions and medications. Overall, I just tell people to stay as healthy as possible. Really, diet is one of the most important things you can do. Just eat a nice, healthy diet. Stay away from the sugar and the fast food. Do a lot of veggies and stay hydrated. Exercise, of course. You have to exercise and move your body and stay active.
So, do you think watching the news and getting nervous about coronavirus, would that have any impact on the immune system that you can see?
Yeah, I mean, it's been shown that certain endorphins that we have, our hormones, enzymes, when we're anxious and nervous, it affects the entire body. When we're happy and we have a lot of that dopamine and serotonin going on, our body does better, and so we are a product of what our brain does, kind of thing, and even if there is some kind of placebo effect there, it's real. The brain controls the body. Placebo effect is real. And so if we're watching the news, we're getting really anxious about it, that will affect us detrimentally.
Right. Big time, won't it?
Yep.
Yes. And so, these, watching the news, getting stuck in the frenzy is probably the worst thing you can do. I just want to end, and I want to talk a little bit about NAD, BPC 157. We promised people we'd get to this, and we've just got about, 5-6 minutes left. And so NAD, Steve, you're a big fan of NAD. What do you like about it?
Yeah, so NAD is great. It seems to be just a really good detoxifier. It turns the cells over. It decreases autoimmunity, and it boosts the immune system like crazy. You have to be careful with NAD. We drip it slowly. If you do a fast drip, as Cade knows, there he is, it can really kind of take you out. It makes you feel. I haven't done it, but I've dripped it into many people, and you get pain in your stomach, you get pain in your chest, you just kind of get this overall heavy feeling. You feel like a pound of bricks just fell on top of you, or you got hit by a train.
Right.
So you have to be very slow with it, but dripped slowly, it works very well. People feel great. At the Go Wellness event we had just last weekend, or 2 weekends ago, sorry. I dripped it into one of our clients, and it took him an hour. And he did it in an hour, and he felt great, no problem at all. And what we see afterwards is that people they feel rejuvenated, they feel detoxified. Like, I feel like I'm healthier now. My cells they're turning over quicker. My immune system has been boosted, and people just feel great.
Awesome. And, David Sinclair is if you look at his research, he's a Harvard researcher, Harvard scientist. He was the one that was like big into resveratrol. And he still is. He's like, resveratrol, there's one paper where they debunked the whole thing and said it's pseudoscience, it's a myth. You got to drink like 17 bottles of wine to get the proper resveratrol, because that's a precursor. It's like, if NAD is the engine for metabolism, resveratrol is like the accelerator of that engine. So it just speeds it up. But he's now learned that, there are other precursors that you can take, even doing NAD. And so he's a big proponent of this just for overall cellular health. Well, here's a study that was published in the Aging Cell, the Journal of Aging Cell, in 2019, just last year. And they found that the treatment of the NAD precursor, nicotinamide riboside, which is in your RG3 synapsin, for those of you who are working on your brain, it rejuvenates the intestinal stem cells from aged mice and reverses an impaired ability to repair gut damage. So just by doing NAD or the nicotinamide riboside, this can actually help repair the gut and eliminate a lot of the inflammation in the body. So NAD is, not only does it help with repairing the DNA, it protects your brain cells from damage, it reduces inflammation, it fights the oxidative process. And like Steve says, it's a huge booster for metabolism. So NAD is that would be a great adjunct to, using thymosin alpha-1, get some of the Chinese herbs, get your mints. I mean, I always eat a lot of basil, parsley, oregano, thyme, all these things, but go to the grocery store and buy that stuff instead of the toilet paper. Well, we want you to use toilet paper, don't get me wrong. In Japan, do they have, do they use water? Or they use toilet paper there? Or are they using they have crazy toilets in Japan.
They use toilet paper. It was the first time I had used a bidet.
Right, yeah.
And in some of the train stations out in the boonies, they still have squatters,
right.
I think. And there wasn't any toilet paper in those facilities. We had to use flyers. So
A flyer. God. All right.
Well, it was bring your own. How's that?
BYTP. That's how parties are going to be these days with coronavirus. It's like, look, if you need to go to the bathroom, we're on everything's rationed here. So BYTP. Yeah. And so we're going to be offering at the clinic, come in, see Steve, get an NAD drip. You can get your thymosin alpha-1 injections, and those are simple. It's an insulin. It doesn't hurt. Get some stem cell IVs. That's the best thing you can possibly do. I mean, if it's eradicating HIV, Coronavirus has nothing on that virus. That virus is so much more powerful. So there's some simple things you can do. And when you come in, we'll actually give you a free toilet paper roll. Right?
There you go.
Nice. That's,
All right,
that's
well,
worth the price of admission right there, guys.
good. That's a really good ending point. Any final questions before we finish up, Cade?
Had a question. I think you may have answered it prior, but it just came in. What does NAD stand for? I would try to say it, but I'll butcher it.
Yeah,
Well, yeah. Good luck on that one.
Nicotinamide.
it's on the next slide. It's that nicotinamide, riboside.
No, it's adenosine.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Nicotinamide, adenosine, and so that is it. I don't have the perfect pronunciation of it, so great question. All right, Steve. Well, it's been really fun having you on. Thanks so much for all the great work you do for all our patients at East West.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Incredible, and for Go Wellness. And thanks everyone for being on this. We'll see you next week.
Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Reagan. Thanks, Steve, for joining us. Everybody give it up for Steve. That was amazing. Woo! All right. Well done.
Thanks, Reagan. Thanks, guys.
And we will be back same time, same place next week. I think next week we got Justin Lane, Functional Medicine Director of East West Health, that's going to be joining us next week. So make sure you guys tune in next time. Love you all. Have a great one.
Bye-bye.